Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third and final hour of the Live with Renk show. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate that. I hope all of you have been waiting for this interview. As I said when I started the show off today, I interviewed yesterday. She was proffered to me, a human rights attorney from California who was part of a group or started a group called Cut 50 that wants to cut 50% of the population in our prisons. And a lot of what she centered around were drug cases, mental health cases, and then, of course, if you were listening to me yesterday, you remember her going down the juvenile issues. And then something I do want to make very clear, and maybe we can get some clarification from the judge who's here, that to get into state prison on only drug charges, you've got to be someone who is either have multiple charges against you many times, or you're selling or dealing as opposed to you're just a general user and thrown in. So, in studio with me, and I'm very happy because Calhoun County Commissioner Steve Frisbee was listening to the show yesterday. Thank you for that, Steve. And he heard me talk and interview this Sheila, I forget her name now. Sheila Jackson Lee. Oh, wait, no, that's the Houston person. They heard me, it was Jessica Sloan. Jessica Jackson Sloan, I think is her name. And he called in, and we didn't have time to get to him. I wouldn't have been able to give him enough time. I asked him to come on today to discuss kind of what this person yesterday was going into, and that's really the specialty courts that we have here in Michigan as well as in Calhoun County. So he was kind enough to get together Judge Beardslee, who's in studio with me, as well as probation officer James Brutsche. Is that correct? Great. And of course, Calhoun County Commissioner Steve Frisbee's in here with me. Now, I know for all those other counties who are listening to me, I'm sure across the state, in fact, if you guys can about 2-3 inches from your mouth, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you those mics. Okay. Judge Beardslee, welcome to the Live with Renk.
Good morning.
I'm assuming these specialty courts with here in Calhoun County, drug, mental, veterans and sobriety. Does that sound about right?
Yep.
That's right. I'm assuming those are similar to all the other counties, or many counties have all four or some portion of them?
It varies from county to county. In Calhoun County, we do have the courts that you just mentioned. There's also a street court for people who have basically are homeless people or otherwise have some other issues. But yeah.
So there's a fifth one?
That's right.
Okay, because I have on my article I wrote out there, drug court, mental health court, veterans court, sobriety court, and a street court.
Right. There are two drug courts. There's a men's and a women's drug court, which are operated by Judge Lincoln, handles the women's drug court, and Judge Hallisey operates the men's drug court.
Well, I certainly want to get into the reason why there may be two, but let's start at the top. Why, at what point and why from your understanding, did we start turning to, or James, the probation officer, start turning to these individual specialty courts? What was the goal?
Well, I think the goal is, when I look at it from the district court bench perspective, I have the ability to put somebody in jail for up to 90 days, typically maybe 180 days if it's a second offense. And so there's not a lot of life-changing activity that happens in a 90-day jail sentence for some people. I would think for some of us it would be pretty traumatic, and we would think, I'm never going to do that again. For other people, not so much.
Right. It's kind of like your concern is those with it's not so much, you're warehousing these people.
Right. And so to put somebody in jail for 90 days means that they're going to be sober for 90 days, and on the 91st day, they're going to get out and they're going to go have a drink. And so...
Probably many drinks.
Right. Yep. Yeah, maybe more than one.
Yes.
And so if that happens, that's not really in the best interest of society, and it's not in the best interest of the individual either. And so what we are attempting to do is to encourage people, with the threat of a jail sanction while they're in the program, but long term, we'd like to have people be sober. And it's very gratifying to see graduates at the end of the program, after they've been in the program for typically 18 months to up to 2 years, they'll sort of tell their life story. And many of them are glad that they were brought into the program because they have realized that life is better when they're sober. And
so this all started because someone figured out that whatever we're doing is not working as far as trying to really help society, them as well as society, because reoffenders doesn't help us, because even if they're drug or alcohol dependent, they could hurt someone out there driving or what have you. So that's society. They could steal to get the money they need to feed their habit. So it was all around what, James?
I think a big problem is a lot of people started being reactionary to crimes. And with treatment courts, they're more preventative, while there still is a reactionary component to it. But like Judge hinted at, a lot of people, if they just do jail, they're going to immediately go back to that same behavior.
Well, if I may, and again, in studio with me is James Brutsche, probation officer. He was just speaking. Judge Beardslee and Calhoun County Commissioner Steve Frisbee. Now, James, you said reactionary. What do you mean?
So someone commits a crime. That individual crime we look at and say, hey, that guy did that crime, so there's a punishment associated with it. With treatment courts, it's more so, why did that person commit that crime? Is that person committing that crime because they have a severe alcohol use disorder, or is there other components in their home? Is their environment stable? So it's more so we look at the person as a whole rather than just the crime that they committed.
So they're just not a number walking in front of Judge Beardslee with a file number that here's another one we have to do. Do a judge or James, whoever can answer this the best. Does everybody get a shot, or is that who makes the determination that they're going to a specialty court, be it the drug, mental health, veterans, society, sobriety, or street?
well, I'm going to limit my answer to just the sobriety court because that's the only one that I have direct knowledge of.
Okay.
But it also happens to be the one that has the greatest population.
I bet.
And you know, people in sobriety court are not that different from you and me. It's people who, some of them are hardcore alcoholics who drink and drive on a regular basis, and sometimes it's people who made bad decisions and crossed that line and committed a crime and drove when they were drunk or under the influence of drugs. But the determination about who goes into the program is really made by there's a sobriety court committee that reviews each file every time there's somebody convicted of a drunk driving crime, drinking and driving related offense in Calhoun County. We review that file to make a determination, and essentially what we're looking for is prior convictions. So it's typically not somebody on their first conviction, but if they have prior convictions, especially if those convictions are within the last few years, and also what the rate of the level of intoxication. So if they had a 0.17 or a greater number than that, which would be considered super drunk, then that would increase the likelihood that they're going to be in the program. The statute that creates the sobriety court specifically excludes people who have a history of assaultive behavior. So if somebody has a history of assaults or domestic violence or something of that nature, they would typically not come into the program.
Or either first-timers? Is that what I heard you say?
Typically not first-timers. Typically not first-timers.
Okay.
Normally, it's certainly conceivable that people will think, whoa, I touched that hot stove, I've learned my lesson, I'm not going to do that again.
Okay.
If they touch that hot stove the second time, then there's a pretty good indicator that there's something else going on there.
Right. And especially when it comes to drunk driving or drinking, and you said hardcore drinkers, I think people need to realize that when you talk about the alcoholic or the hardcore drinker, it's not like you see on TV, the bum on the street. It could be a guy who's working, a lady who's working every day. It could be people that you would never expect to be hardcore drinkers, and they are, and it's helping them, especially if they're repeat offenders, to get out of that cycle. Right. Is that what this is all about, James?
Yeah, from my knowledge, just personally looking at sobriety courts, because I'm still a pretty young probation officer, but my knowledge of drinking, offenders was that's a severe alcoholic. That's not always the case. It's a lot of working professionals that are actually in our programs, and it's more. I like to think of it as not a non-alcoholic versus alcoholic look. It's more of a spectrum of, does your drinking cause you problems in your life? And are you able to control those problems? If you get too drunk driving, you're in the justice system, I would say that kind of qualifies as a drinking problem. So we try to reverse the stigma of alcoholic versus non-alcoholic by more looking at individualized of, does this person's drinking need to be addressed in a treatment setting?
What happens when they do go in front into the court? Now, is it a judge who sits on that sobriety court?
Right. The sobriety court committee consists of myself, James Brutsche, Mike Horn, who's also another probation officer, and then we have people from Summit Point, defense attorney, and the assistant
prosecuting attorney.
So,
And on air with me is Judge Beardslee, that you just heard from the 10th District Court, correct? James Brutsche, he's a probation officer, and also you haven't heard yet, Steve Frisbee, a Calhoun County commissioner. And again, we're talking about, yes, Calhoun County, because that's where these gentlemen are dealing with. But it is, I'm sure, likely that many counties out there have this sobriety or some court like this.
right.
So,
Well, actually, there are sobriety courts also in St. Joseph County, Kalamazoo County, Eaton County, Ingham County. So those are all within some portion of your listening area.
Right.
I think I'm not aware of a sobriety court in Jackson County, Branch County, Berry County, but a lot of your listeners live in counties where there are sobriety courts. There are also drug treatment courts in many of those counties, and veterans treatment court as well.
So you're looking for people who come in front of, who commit these crimes. And we're talking about specialty courts here. And let's stick with sobriety courts because that's what you guys deal with directly. Who come into the system and they're not first-timers because you're hoping that, the trauma that they go through being in the court system, many people probably, it's the first time they've ever been involved with the court system, and that will shake them and they won't reoffend. The ones that will, second, third time, what happens when you guys say, okay, we want to move this to the specialty court, the sobriety court, because of these extenuating circumstances that you believe it could help them going in front of this court instead of being thrown in jail for 90 days or 6 months?
Typically what happens is an individual is sentenced to an 18-month term of probation, and while they're on that probation, they have to abide by the rules of the sobriety court program, which includes they get to come see their favorite probation officer on a weekly basis initially.
Yep,
and
weekly.
You want to talk more about what some of those other requirements
So what
are?
happens is they come in front of, instead of going right to you as a 10th district court judge, they come to you, let's say, as a sobriety court judge. And is it similar to being in the 10th Circuit Court? It's just different, you have different tools?
Well, yes. What happens is they're sentenced like they would be, like anybody else would be sentenced after a conviction. And then the sentence, instead of being just what we would maybe refer to as regular probation or enhanced probation, is sobriety court probation. And so if they're in sobriety court, then they are expected to come in and report on a weekly basis initially with their probation officer. And they also are obligated to take some other steps, including alcohol monitoring, ignition interlock,
Treatments,
treatment.
And that's what I want. I'm going to take a quick break, come back on the other side. I want to get to the point where, all right, they go through this. We'll mention again what you guys just brought up, what they face. And then what has been the success? So how long has it been in place? And what has been the success rate so far? You're listening to Live with Renk. On air with me is Judge Beardslee in the 10th Circuit Court, James Brutsche, probation officer, and seen but not heard Calhoun County Commissioner Steve Frisbee. We'll be right back after this. Well, here comes the judge, Judge Beardsley, is in studio with me. So are you hip?
That music was pretty reflective of what happens in our courtroom.
Oh, was it? Yeah, yes.
Oh.
And would you call yourself hip? You're not Judge Pigmeat, I think. Or no, Pigmeat's the name of the guy, the band, or the guy who sings it, I believe. But I appreciate in studio with me again is Judge Beardsley from the 10th Circuit Court, as well as James Brutsche, a probation officer, and the not heard but not seen either because it's radio, Calhoun County Commissioner Steve Frisbee, who put this together for us, and I really do appreciate it. Piggybacking after or from my interview yesterday with our human rights attorney out in California who wants to reduce prison sentence by 50%. And Steve was listening, heard that, and said, hey, we should just talk about this here that's happening in Michigan. And I do appreciate that. Before we ended the last segment, we were talking about what happened. So similar to seeing Judge Beardslee or presenting yourself probably when you don't want to, but you have to present yourself in front of you, Judge. Instead of being 10th District Court Judge, you are 10th District Court Specialty Court Sobriety Judge. And these cases are picked on where possibly you guys see circumstances or what have you where you think that we can nip this in the bud maybe here. And we can, instead of just warehousing them in county prison for 90 days, we send them to this treatment. You started discussing it, James, being a probation officer. What happens once they're sentenced to 18 months probation or what have you? What different happens in sobriety court than in 10th District Court?
So with sobriety court, most sobriety courts or most treatment courts in the state of Michigan have usually a phase structure in which they have to go through. Ours is 4 phases. I've seen some that have 3 phases, but each phase is kind of the difficulty level. Phase 1 is the most difficult. You're meeting with your probation officer once a week. You're seeing the judge every 2 weeks. We really personalize it so that person knows that we're there, that we're watching them, in good ways though, in that we're there to pretty much oversee that they're doing all the steps right. After that, the phases get a little progressively easier, not too much easier, because regular probation, they might come see their probation officer once a month. They might have to blow into an alcohol device, but with sobriety court, we're able to catch people pretty quickly if they're not adhering to the terms of their probation, and take corrective action if needed. But we are creative with it. Not everything is jail. Some people just expect, hey, I missed an alcohol test, and that they're going to go to jail. We might be creative, make them do community service, might make them drug test more. So it's individualized to the client of the probation for sure.
And once they get through the 4 phases, then what happens?
Once they get through the 4 phases, we hopefully are pretty confident that they will not reoffend. We will graduate them. A lot of the programs do set up support networks for them. As soon as they get out, it's pretty much assumed that they will still be attending AAs, Alcoholics Anonymous, weekly, but also in mentor programs. The Veterans Treatment Court in Calhoun County has a very good mentor program in which they hook up with fellow veterans in which they mentor them through the process, but furthermore, even after the process. So it's just a continuum of care, making sure that they know what they can access once in case there might be a potential for relapse. And that's a big thing for them.
Judge Beardslee, as a judge, do you find it refreshing to be able to have a different avenue of which to treat these cases?
Sure do, because the old way of dealing with these types of things was essentially is make a determination about how many days in jail is this person going to receive. And now there's a relationship built, and I think that the participants in the sobriety court really want to try to please the court and to please their probation officer, because there is that relationship, and that not everybody succeeds, unfortunately, but it means that 70% approximately of the people who enter into the sobriety court program in this county complete the program within about 18 to 24 months. And it's hard. A month or so ago we had a graduation ceremony at which a Battle Creek police officer attended, and this officer had actually arrested one of the graduates a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And at the end of the ceremony, he stood up and said, "Hey, I'd just like to say, initially when I heard about sobriety court, I thought, oh, this is just another way to go soft on crime. And what I've seen is that people who participate in sobriety court have to, for lack of a better word, jump through a lot more hoops. They have to do a lot more. There are higher expectations of them, and they really have to earn the ability to graduate out of the program." And he was quite impressed, and that's not at all uncommon. We get that kind of response from people on a pretty frequent basis.
I could see now from speaking with you guys and thinking about it that that relationship has possibly, hopefully, turn from an adversarial relationship within, jail or not jail, not caring about the person at all, to a relationship of trying to deal with it. Because as society, we need to deal with this.
Yep.
If you're just going to throw them in jail and forget about it, and then they come out and reoffend, what is that? That hasn't helped anybody and just cost us taxpayer dollars.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And so certainly I'm hoping those people, then again, who want to, the people meaning the defendants,
Right.
who want to improve their
Yeah,
lives.
it's interesting because people come into the program and sometimes frequently they're unenthusiastic about
Sure.
coming into the program.
Yeah, sure.
But it's an amazing thing, really, to see that after a period of time, typically 2 to 4 months, maybe 6 months, this light comes on and it's, oh, this is good for me. This is actually going to be helpful to me. My life is going to get better now.
Right.
And that's a wonderful thing to see. And then people have a whole different level of motivation. They want to succeed at this program. It's not just, well, if I don't do this, I'm going to have to go to jail for the full term. There's actually an upside to this thing.
They start looking at their life more long term.
Right.
In a program like this, rather than short term, I don't want to go to jail. Long term, I want a healthy, happy life.
It's just like anything. If you're not going to put yourself into it and find out what you're getting out of it, you're not going to improve on it. I'm going to ask him to stay over one more segment because I want to get success rates coming up. Let me take a quick break. You're listening to Live with Renk. On air with me is James Brutsche, the probation officer, Judge Beardslee from the 10th Circuit Court. We're talking about specialty courts in Michigan, specifically in Calhoun County, and this one specifically the Sobriety Court, because that's what these gentlemen deal with. But also James has had some experience with the Veterans Court. I just want you to give us a little bit of an overview, if you can, the best you can of that, because there are veterans in need and there's special circumstances or needs for them also. You listen to Live with Renk. We'll be right back after this. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Live with Renk show. Last segment here and dealing with the specialty court, specifically the Sobriety Court here in Calhoun County, but they're all around my listening area, around the state of Michigan. Not necessarily, maybe your county doesn't have one of them yet. You can check into that. They'll speak to that. I would like to tell you about an email I just received from one of you, a listener of mine who was listening to this, and I really appreciate that person emailing us. They want to remain anonymous, and they said, I graduated from drug court in 2001 in Kalamazoo. My 2 felonies were dismissed when I graduated. These courts saved lives. They saved mine. Clean since 9/2/2001. I was a full-blown method addict. I weighed 120 pounds. My life has changed for the better. My son was 2. He does not have any memories of me using anything ever than the cycle. The cycle has chance to be, anything, I guess, other than the cycle has a chance to be broken. I'll try to fix it for him there. I do appreciate you emailing me and letting us know that, because that's exactly a perfect setup, guys, for this segment, which I wanted you, Judge Beardslee from the 10th Circuit Court, James Brutsche as a probation officer here in Calhoun County, to discuss the success rates. How long, either one of you, has this Sobriety Court been in place?
Sobriety Court's been active here in Calhoun County since 2011 when Judge John Hallisey formed it, and he gets the credit for taking the initiative to make it happen in the first place. When he was elevated to circuit court a year and a half ago, that created a vacancy on the district court bench, and that's the job that I was appointed to. But James has been involved in Sobriety Court and also in Veterans Treatment Court.
Yep,
For
that's
a
right.
little bit of time. So
Yep.
what is the success rate that you guys are finding? I know it's newer, so it's 5-6 years old. What's the success rate that you know of?
So for long-term success, the state court administrator's office, the people in Lansing that kind of do all the research and statistics behind treatment courts, whether they work or whether they do not work, have definitely been definitive on they work. In regards to Sobriety Court in Calhoun County, over about a 4-year, so there's a 2-year and a 4-year stretch, the 4-year recidivism rate for Calhoun County is right around 4%, and which means any new alcohol or drug-related offenses in which that graduate, has unfortunately picked up since they graduate Sobriety Court In comparison, the other target population for people that do not participate in the sobriety court is upwards to 16%. So we're drastically reducing the recidivism of drug and alcohol-related offenses.
Can you repeat those numbers again? So the recidivism rate in the sobriety court is what?
4% for any new drug or alcohol charges. So after they graduate, after 4 years, we look to see if they picked up any new charges, and only 4% of those graduates picked up any new charges.
And in regular court, it's 16%?
16%, yep.
Oh, quite honestly, that's pretty good. I thought the 16 doesn't sound too bad either, but obviously the 4 is much better.
It is, the statistics are great, but what really makes an impression on me is the conversations you have with people when they're graduating. And you talk about the cycle that your listener emailed about. There is a cycle, and it's a downward spiral because people, it follows generation after generation in families, and we hear stories from people who are graduates who talk about how they started drinking when they were, or smoking dope when they were 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these people, they're sober for a year and a half, and I will ask the question, when's the last time you were sober for a year and a half? Well, let's see.
When I was 11 years old.
13 years old.
32 years ago.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. And it's better for all of us that they're not driving drunk, but it's better for them that they're not abusing drugs and alcohol.
Talking about the cycle, I have a cousin who's been a long time, a county prison guard here in Michigan. And he has told me many times that, kids I went to high school with, they're in jail. It's just a revolving door. They go out, they come back in. Now their kids are coming in, behind them, and that's part of what this. Hopefully, the drug court, as well as the sobriety court, as well as all these other courts, are trying to accomplish. Because again, it's not an adversarial so much as it is we're lending a helping hand. Now, Veterans Court, James, what happens there? I know you were only involved about 3 months, and again, then we're talking to James Brutsche, probation officer in Calhoun County. In a Veterans Court, what generally happens?
So in a Veterans Court, same kind of similar setup as a treatment court, pretty intensive probation. But for the veterans, they love the structure of that program. As soon as a lot of veterans are no longer in active duty, they kind of don't know where they fit in. And unfortunately, they do pick up crimes during that time. These veteran courts are an avenue for them to pursue better opportunities for themselves long term. So Veterans Court, still same kind of criteria as, meeting with your probation officer once a month or once a week in the beginning, but meeting with judge, having that good connection with, a judge, realizing that judge actually cares about me. He's not just going to put me in jail. Mentor programs, they meet with fellow veterans, veterans that have either graduated from the Veterans Treatment Court and or are just working with the veterans because they want to give back to the veterans. Furthermore, we establish good connections with the VA Veterans Administration to connect that gap, because there is a huge gap in services that veterans sometimes do not even understand that they qualify for those benefits. So our Veterans Court works hand in hand with the Veterans Administration in Battle Creek to make sure that all the links are tied, so they have that continuum of care to make sure they don't, commit more crimes. Because
dealing with veterans, some may have a certain set of circumstances that only these people know, especially if they've been in war.
Yes,
absolutely. As opposed to just a veteran who's doing a desk jockey job.
In this county, Judge Frank Line operates the Veterans Treatment Court, and if you know Judge Line, he has a great personality, and he really connects very well with people. I mean, he's a treat to be around, and the veterans. I've had the opportunity to sit in a few times and just observe, just to see how he does it, because he knows what he's doing, and he just connects with people. It's beautiful to watch.
So all in all, success, and we should continue down these specialty courts.
Oh, I think it's for the benefit of the individuals, the families, and the community. So, absolutely.
All right. Well, I appreciate James Brutsche, probation officer, coming in to discuss this with me and my listeners. Judge Beardslee from the 10th Circuit Court, thank you very much for coming in and discussing the not heard or either seen, probably better because it's radio. He has a face for radio like me. Calhoun Commissioner Steve Frisbee.